Pues, grabamos.
Could you give us an example of a real life organization, maybe a social organization where you've managed change, or which would be an example of how you go about getting change?
Yeah, so for example, if you are a not-for-profit, you might depend on donations. And often at the top you're expected to go out and ask for donations, and as you probably know, that can be really challenging. And so often organizations will say, you need to do better. Go out and ask for more money, ask more people. And again, we run into this sort of situation where people might sit around a boardroom saying, yes, of course, but they're not going to do it. And they may even think they're going to do it. They have good intentions, but it doesn't happen. And when I say like run at the wall, you're not, it doesn't matter how fast you run, how big of a head start you have, you're still going to hit the wall. We need to find the door. So looking at, okay, when we don't ask, why don't we ask? What makes it make sense that we're not asking? It's uncomfortable. We might lose friendships. And then we can start to think about how rational is that? Mm-hmm. And we can help people look at, is it really rational? How could I figure it out? Are other people good at it? How do they do it? Could I try on a small scale and see if I ask this person for more money, will they stop talking to me? Or could I learn, like, it's okay, maybe they'll give it, maybe they won't, but we're still friends, or we still have the same relationship. So again, going to, look, it makes sense, you're not doing it yet, but let's help you figure out what's getting in the way of doing it more, because it's probably not that you didn't learn the right script, or you didn't take the right class in the technical aspects of asking for money. It's probably more internal.
Yes.
And then from an organizational perspective, you could say, as an organization, what are we doing that's getting in the way of people doing this? Like when people don't give enough or find enough money, how do we treat them? Do we just say, okay, that's the way it is? Or do we help them? Do we coach them? Do we find other people? How do we manage the fact that we're not doing what we say we want to be doing?
Mm-hmm. And how do you begin these conversations? How do you find out what it is that an organization or an individual wants to change, and what happens when they think they want one thing and in reality they need another? Or how do these processes begin?
Sure. So I think there are different philosophies about this. I don't think it's my job, the way I work, to say you want the wrong thing. So I can perhaps, if I think it doesn't make sense, I can ask questions, I can be curious to make sure that this is the right thing. But I'm not going to say, Helena, you said this is your goal, but that's a bad goal. But what we will do is say, okay, what would be the thing that would make the biggest difference? Why focus way down the list unless it's just to get some experience? That can be okay. But at least let's think about whether it's an individual or an organization, what would make the most difference to be more effective at either level. And that's a really easy thing, in theory at least, for people to do, to ask the people around them, if I could do one thing to be more effective, what would it be? Mm-hmm. And then you get some idea of, like, you can say yes or no, but this is what other people think. You should say good morning to me in the morning. You should, and again, I think the other key part that people miss sometimes is to drill down to the behavior. What would that look like? What exactly would I or we be doing differently if I were to be that effective?
Mm-hmm. And I assume that conversation could be at an individual level, or you can have it at an organizational level.
Right.
What would we do as an organization?
Right, and what I'm going to be talking about today and tomorrow is, as a team in an organization, how can we work through this process and say, okay, what is our goal? What are the things we're doing or not doing that's getting in the way of achieving that goal? And then what are we worried about? Not pointing fingers, but as a group and as individuals owning our own stuff, what are we worried about that's keeping us from making that change? And then what can we do about it?
So what advice would you give for somebody entering into a process of change, either on their own or as an organization? What would you say was most important?
I think for me, what I would say is curiosity. Because if you can be curious, you're much less likely to be defensive. You're much less likely to attack others. You're just trying to figure stuff out. And if it were that easy, you'd already be doing it, whether it's individually or as a group. So if you can stay curious, I think that opens a lot of doors.
How do you go about getting curious?
That's a great question. So how do you go about getting curious? I guess you could say the same thing in terms of what's keeping you from being curious, and also recognizing curious people assume that other people are curious too, and not everybody is equally curious. So again, just recognizing if people aren't curious, we need to help them be more curious if in fact we buy into that idea. And maybe one way is for us to model it also. So if we can be curious, when we ask for feedback and we say that doesn't make any sense internally, do we get defensive or do we show our curiosity and say, help me understand?
What would curiosity look like at an organizational level? How would an organization that was curious behave?
I think they would, of course, you have to get things done. You can't spend all of your time just thinking in caves. But you make room for, is there anything we should be talking about that we're not talking about, either in general or in a specific meeting? One of the examples that I heard that I really liked was somebody at the top of a major organization who said, okay, we all agreed too quickly, go out and think of all the reasons we could be wrong, and we'll have another meeting in a couple of days, just to make sure that we're going down the right course here.
Wow.
That's really incredible curiosity.
That's a wonderful example. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
Muchas gracias.
Gracias.